Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of Seriously Risky Business, the podcast we do here at Risky Biz HQ, which is all about government policy and intelligence in the cyber domain. My name's Patrick Gray, and we're going to chat with Tom Uren in just a moment, who is our policy and intelligence editor here at Risky Business, about all of the work he's done this week in putting together the Seriously Risky Business newsletter, which if you have not subscribed to yet, you absolutely should, and you can find that at risky.biz. All of the subscribe links are there. We would like to say thank you to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for supporting Tom's work with us, and also Lawfare Media, which syndicates Tom's newsletter and publishes it on their website. And we do have a sponsor this week, which is Stairwell, which is a really interesting company that does all sorts of fun stuff in malware analysis. You can basically have your own virus total for your enterprise if you want. Go threat hunting, do all sorts of fun stuff. It's like file-based threat hunt within your org. Very cool stuff. That is Stairwell Security. So, Tom, good to see you. Let's just kick it right off now by talking about, you've covered two things this week. Obviously, you've taken a look at TM Signal, TeleMessage Signal, which is the not so great messaging app that it turns out senior White House figures are using to have conversations that they shouldn't be having. But we also have a second topic to discuss this week, which is looking at comments out of a White House sort of cyber advisor. This is Alexei Bulazal. I'm probably butchering his name. Sorry to you, Alexei. He is the senior director for cyber and special assistant to the president. And he's made a series of comments saying that the Trump admin is about to get more aggressive when it comes to offensive cyber operations. I mean, this is something that you predicted around the time of Trump's inauguration in a previous newsletter edition, which is, Trump loves to use state power. I think the headline you gave that is like, Trump will flex America's cyber muscles. And it looks like that's the way it's playing out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it is not just this is not just a Trump thing. It's a evolution of, like, pretty consistently successive administrations have gotten more aggressive in using offensive cyber operations. So when I talk about offensive ones, I mean ones that disrupt, degrade, deny. So they actually change things on the ground. And he talks about trying to I don't know that he would be happy using the word deterrence, but trying to stop other cyber actors by actually hitting them very hard. Now, I think, personally, my view is that the US has never really hit back hard against cyber actors. And it's actually a very difficult thing to do, in the sense that the example I think of is Chinese intellectual property theft. It's been a wide-ranging, multi-decade campaign, and the US has hit back against particular threat actors or small espionage contractors that have been doing that. And it's like trying to deter an army by shooting a few foot soldiers. It just doesn't work. And so at the time, it was like, oh my God, we're going to publicly indict them and name them. But I guess with the benefit of hindsight, that was never going to work. Because it really is just, you're naming a cog in a machine. You're not even doing anything to them. You're just like calling them out in indictment.
Okay. But so we agree indictments haven't worked, right? Name and shame and indictments haven't worked. And indeed, a few days ago, I spoke with the vice chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Senator Mark Warner. And that was interesting because he's previously said, America needs to strike back against Volt Typhoon. We need to do to them what they're doing to us. And then I tried to pin him down on those comments. This is earlier this week. People can go watch the YouTube of that or listen to it as a podcast. He politicianed me with his answer because I'm like, okay, you said you need to strike back. He's a Democrat. So as to your point, this isn't just a Trump thing. But he didn't really say anything, right? He was just like, hand-wavy politician answers, nothing about like what you would actually do. So when all of these politicians talk about getting serious about striking back against cyber, what do they mean? I mean, the United States is in a position now where its economic levers are basically exhausted because they've got a blanket 145% tariff on all Chinese goods.
Yep.
So they've done the indictment thing. What does it look like? I mean, Warner would absolutely not endorse the idea, at least in an interview with me, that they should go and, hack Chinese civilian infrastructure, which is what the Chinese are doing to them, because that's kind of illegal. So what does this mean? Like, I guess we've just seen this never-ending parade of officials saying it's time to get tough. But what does tough look like?
Yeah, I'm bemused as well. So my historical thinking is that if in the past the US had been willing to levy very hard, like even tariffs, and said, okay, you're hacking our industry, we're going to sanction or levy tariffs against the industries that are benefiting from this hacking.
We have seen that. They did do that. I mean, they sanctioned a few targeted companies that they believed were using stolen Western IP. So we did see that. It didn't do anything, but we've seen it.
Yeah. I think it was still too little, too late. Now, I think you're right that at this point, there's no more sanctions that will make any difference. And so I'm skeptical that throwing harder cyber punches will make much difference, and not because throwing harder punches is a bad idea, but because cyber punches are just not that hard usually. And so it, to me, is a bit of a mystery as to what that will actually look like and whether it will have any effect. And so you can imagine that, for example, against a hacking crew, the US might respond, gain access to their networks, and actually do something like a ransomware attack or a RMRF.
This is sort of where my head was going as well, which is you would release the RMRF shark into like companies like iSoon. Anyone who's linked to developing tools that are used in these sort of campaigns, you could just RMRF them, and that would seem to be a, not completely insane idea, actually.
No, that would slow them down, and it would make them pay a lot more attention to OPSEC, which is another way of slowing them down. And so I think it's kind of tactically effective, but it turns it into a skirmish, which is better than no skirmish at all, where because it's slower and they're less effective, but it doesn't end the war. I think it just changes the equilibrium. Now, I guess from a US point of view, you would say changing the equilibrium would be good because we've got better cyber operators, and so it'll be
and there's an asymmetry.
Favor.
There's an asymmetry around the defense there too, because like what you could do to iSoon, like, someone listening to this might think, well, Cyber Command might not want to give away their beautiful choice 0 days, doing an attack like that against a contractor who might intercept them. A lot of these companies, they're not well secured, right? You would not need to use your most advanced tools to do that to them. Whereas if they were trying to strike back against America's defense industrial base, like there are corners of the DIB in the United States that are a little bit shaky, which is why we've seen efforts over the last sort of decade, by like the NSA Cybersecurity Directorate to secure the DIB, right? Like that's within their remit. But it would be difficult to imagine that a Chinese crew tasked with retaliating for something like this would be able to go and like release the RF shark at Lockheed Martin. Like that ain't happening.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think that kind of thing makes sense. I don't think it is a game changer. So they kind of talk about it as a potential game changer, like releasing offensive cyber hounds will really make a huge difference. I don't think it will. I think it's probably a good idea. I think it's worth trying. I think people always worry about escalation, but there's research that people just don't think of cyber incidents in the same way they think about bombs and bullets. So I think there's like kind of a natural limit to escalation. So I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. I guess it's a case where we might actually find out at this point. But I mean, indeed, when Warner made those comments, was that like a month ago or so, saying we should, strike back, or the United States should strike back at China the same way that it's Volt typhooning them. We got mail from people who worked in critical infrastructure in the United States saying, we are not ready for an escalation here, like we really don't want this. So, and again, there are corners of the DIB where this could get messy, I guess, is all I'd say on that. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it could escalate. I wouldn't rule it out, is all I'm getting at.
My first thought, if I was in charge, I wouldn't say go and hack Chinese critical infrastructure. I would say go and hack the people who are hacking our infrastructure.
Yes.
And That seems to me to be a middle ground that's I don't see how that would escalate. They've already, to some degree, done some of that by knocking their botnets offline and trying to attack their tools.
Well, and they've been hitting C2s and stuff for a long time. Like that ain't new. But I think, they're talking about going one step further. And I again, like all of these Chinese contractors who are like stealing stuff. This is the funniest thing. They'll steal intelligence when they haven't been tasked to do it, and then they'll just try to sell it.
Yeah.
Which is just a crazy way to operate. Like going after those entities, like that seems sane.
I mean, I do wonder whether there's like the potential for sort of human assets, like just buying those Chinese operators or buying intelligence from them. Where are you going to go after? Just getting ahead of what they're doing, because they do seem to be cash strapped and might be amenable to a few extra dollars on the side. I guess these are the sort of ideas that you would want to really brainstorm and pick out the ones that really make sense and are not totally crazy, but are crazier than anyone has thought of actually doing before.
It's funny though when Trump decides to get aggressive in flexing state power. I mean, you think back to a lot of the reporting that emerged after he left his first term around CIA activities in Venezuela. And it sort of seemed like CIA were told to do stuff in Venezuela and kind of half-assed it because they didn't really want to do it. Whereas now you get the impression you might see, he's surrounded by loyalists now. So you might see, a more earnest effort that might be half-assed more due to incompetence than unwillingness now. So it's just, as the curse says, may you live in interesting times. But look, let's move on to the other topic we're going to discuss today. And we did cover this in the weekly show yesterday. I had a good chat to Adam Boileau about this yesterday. But, senior Trump White House officials, and not just Trump officials, let's be clear, we're using this TM signal fork. It's maintained by a company called TeleMessage based out of Israel, which is a whole other issue with it. But this is a fork of Signal that adds message archiving. Now, in many ways, this is a good thing because, one of the criticisms that you and I have had of the widespread use of signal groups within government is that, record keeping is probably not up to scratch. So it looks like they're trying to address that, which is great. Unfortunately, this app is, for want of a better description, it's a pile of crap. It is the way that it's been architected is very insecure. There's source code repos out there with hard-coded creds that have allowed people to just, break in, intercept messages and a whole bunch of customer data. It looks like this app was first used by various US government agencies under when Biden was president. So for me, I mean, obviously this isn't great, but for me, the big question in all of this is when in a world where you do have viable alternatives like Wicker, which is an Amazon product, how on earth did this thing survive US government procurement processes? Because it is not fit for purpose.
That is just very strange and baffling.
It's the million-dollar question, though, in all of this, right? And I don't see many people asking that question, which is bizarre.
Yeah. So I looked at AWS Wicker. The Wicker was separate and AWS bought it. And they've got some pages and they talk about some of the, certifications or authorization processes that they've gone through. And they've got a number and they're actually used by the Department of Defense, not for anything that you would describe at all as mission critical, but things like, I think one case study was helping frontline medical staff. So in or near conflict zones. So it's information that's very important, but if, the medical history of an individual is leaked, the consequences aren't that great. So even with those assurances, it's still not suitable for very classified information. I think they said controlled unclassified information. So unclassified, but stuff that you don't want to get out. So that's the very best. And somehow it managed to get all these authorizations. It's approved in FedRAMP, which is the government's list of pre-approved cloud services. But somehow that didn't end up translating into sales to all these other agencies. So I looked at the procurement records, and Customs and Border Patrol, the Centres for Disease Control, several others were using TeleMessage instead, and including the National Archive, which was like I don't know if that was the root of all evil, but it seems like they're an organisation that would be interested in archiving and maybe don't necessarily have the security awareness or nous to choose the right thing. Yet somehow they've sidestepped Wicker and gone to TeleMessage. Totally baffling.
Which seems to be like a fairly small outfit, based out of Israel. And again, like there is a sort of foreign company aspect to this. Like there's as they say, there's a lot to unpack here. And I think, you were sort of dancing around it as well, because there's kind of two discussions here. There's the, what app can you put on a civilian device that is suitable for discussing classified material? And there isn't one. Yeah. There just isn't one. It doesn't matter how good it is. It's just, public network, civilian devices, like, can't be done. But then there's the second issue, which is, well, obviously, it's still appropriate actually for policymakers to have signal group chats and discussions. That's just the way that it's done now. And so if you're going to have those non-critical, unclassified policy conversations, you can do that from a civilian device. You can do that from a commercial, app, but you just want to make sure it's a good one. And in this case, it just isn't. And what makes it even worse is it looks like probably they would, if Waltz is using this, if he was using this at the time of the original Signal Gate, it makes our call at the time, which is that these messages were almost certainly being observed by foreign adversaries. I mean, it just makes that even more likely.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I think that you say that policymakers should be able to use civilian devices to have those discussions. I'm really torn about that. So I imagine that if you're in Australia, we have a two-party system. So if you're in opposition, you don't have the tools of government, you don't have the resources of government, like you've got no choice. You're having policy discussions about what your positions are. You're probably even talking about what the other side thinks. Maybe they told you, maybe for other reasons. And I think that would all be an intelligence landmine. Gold mine.
Yes.
So those kinds of conversations are still valuable, and ideally you'd like to protect them the best that you can. Now, if you're in opposition, no resources, Signal is the best you've got. I think that once you're in the Trump cabinet, there's a responsibility to do something better than that, because those decisions, I don't know if I use the phrase, but they can affect the fate of nations.
Sure, but there's no universe in which the Trump cabinet can go to an agency like NSA and say, can you please give me something that I can carry around with me and use as I would a civilian device that's going to allow me to have these sorts of conversations? And this is a problem. So I agree with you that in an ideal world, they'd be using something that's much more high assurance, much more controlled. There's also the issue too of, if you are in government, do you really want to be just communicating on devices that are provisioned by essentially a spy agency? And plenty of politicians will say, no, we don't even trust our spy agencies to be in pole position to intercept all of our comms should they want to. So there's all sorts of issues with what you're describing. And I know that as someone who worked for the agency in Australia that would do this, which is ASD, you're like, well, what's the problem? Why wouldn't they trust them? But, I've known enough politicians where they wouldn't feel comfortable with that. So I think this is a very complicated issue.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's, I think earlier during the campaign, there were a couple of reports about the Trump campaign using particular devices that were theoretically hardened and closed networks. So those are the sorts of things that I was thinking about. So
whereby you've got more certified devices that are not necessarily provisioned by an agency, but approved by an agency.
I think it's up to the government of the day to figure out what they're comfortable with. But
in this case, they're comfortable with quite a lot.
Everything. Yeah, that's right. But my point was, it shouldn't be just taking your usual phone and just talking about cabinet discussions in them from day one, which it appears maybe has happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think this is actually an area, and look, as evidenced by the number of hours we've spent talking about this over the last month, this is an area where I think there needs to be some serious policy work.
Yeah, that's right. I think it seems like the Trump administration has, in a way, sleptwalked into a huge problem.
Yeah.
And it's
but let's not just make it about the Trump admin, because, as I keep coming back to, this is a problem everywhere. This is a problem for policymakers and government ministers and whatever, and cabinets all over the world. Like, I don't think anybody's really sat down and thought, like, what should the guidance be? Like, I know that certainly here in Australia, when people are elected to Parliament, they will get a visit from ASD and they will tell them, about the birds and the bees of using their personal devices to have very, different types of communications. And they're like, I think I said to you, they will say to them, think of it as a Chinese listening device. That's what you're carrying around in your pocket. It's a Chinese listening device, treat it accordingly. And, that's all well and good, but yeah.
It becomes very hard to actually treat it like a Chinese listening device.
And it becomes very hard to govern if you have to treat your phone like it's radioactive.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't think we're going to fix it right now, but there's plenty of people who are smarter than you and I who might want to kick off some policy work here. But Tom Uren, we'll wrap it up there. Great to chat to you as always. Fascinating conversation, and I look forward to doing it again with you next week.
Thanks, Patrick.